Okay, so I'm going to be talking about facilitating knowledge exchange, and what I'm including in that is how to provide the right format, incentives, facilitation, and support for knowledge exchange. Um, Capturing knowledge is a really important and sometimes difficult step in knowledge management, so that's why I think it's really important to provide the right format and incentives and facilitation and support for your community. I work with a lot of communities of practice, so that's kind of where I'm coming from. And I feel like a lot of the information that I'm going to be sharing today is helpful whether you're working with a small project team or whether it's an organization-wide community of practice or knowledge base, or maybe you're working with a community that crosses organizations. It's a community of practice around a certain topic, which is the kind of context that I'm most familiar with. But regardless of what size your group is, you always need to find those incentives and formats that work for your community. So we're going to go through some of those options. And based on my experience working with communities of practice in the field of human rights, I'm going to share a little bit about what I've learned and the formats that I've come across for effective knowledge exchange. Some of the information here might be pretty obvious to some of you, but I'm hoping that you'll still take away a few new ideas. Okay, so this is me. Hope everybody can hear me okay. So I have this little quote up here, but I see my work as being at the intersection of information and knowledge management, digital security, and community building in the field of human rights. So I've been working with new tactics in human rights at the Center for Victims of Torture for about 6 years, building a community of practice for human rights defenders. And then I moved to the Engine Room, where I was community catalyst, helping them to build a community of practice around responsible data. And then did a little bit of work with Civicus and still am, building a community of practice around their data shift project. And now I'm just starting to work with Herodox. And we are going to be building a knowledge base and a community of practice around human rights information management. So in total, I have about 8 years of experience with this kind of work. My academic background is in computer science and human rights, which has worked out surprisingly well. Okay, so first, I want to give you a little bit of context. I'm going to share a little bit of information about knowledge exchange within the human rights field. So let's start with the barriers. I've heard this come up a few times in some other presentations, so I wanted to just address it right up front, that yes, sometimes it's really hard to get people to share their knowledge with each other, especially from one organization to another. And there's a few reasons why that's hard, especially from my perspective coming from the human rights field. Competition is one, although I don't see this very often. It is definitely feasible that a group doesn't want to share their knowledge with another group because it's really hard to get funding, and sometimes you feel like you have to prove that you know how to do something better than those other groups, and often it's your knowledge and experience that is your asset. Although I'll just add that I think a lot of funders now want to see more collaboration and more sharing, so it can actually help boost your fundability, perhaps. The second one is security. Human rights defenders have a special consideration when it comes to sharing information online. For example, you might have run a really great campaign around LGBT rights in Uganda, and sharing that information would be super useful to many people, but that might not be the best thing for you and for your organization and for your network. So it's important to be thinking about your own security as you're sharing information with other groups. And then lack of time. I mean, human rights defenders are super busy all the time, so it's really hard to get them to take the time out to log in and share what they know. But there are a lot of really great reasons why it's important to share knowledge within the human rights field. So most of it is focused around mission, because a lot of the practitioners and the organizations in this field are very mission driven. So we want to tap into that. By participating in knowledge exchange activities, you can do your work better, basically. You can learn what works and why. You can learn what doesn't work. You can learn something new by reflecting on your own work and documenting that. And then you can also be creating a stronger network of peers. The next slide here is just a list of some examples of communities of practice within the human rights field. We have Rising Voices, which is a project of Global Voices, and you can see here what kind of information they share and what platform they happen to be using for sharing. And we can talk more about these examples later on if you want me to go back to this. Namadi is using Discourse. It's a pretty new community. Kabisa also uses Discourse and Drupal. The New Tactics in Human Rights Project, where I used to work, we were using Drupal. And then Equitas, and I'm not sure what they use, but that's a closed platform. Okay, so that's a little bit of background about knowledge exchange in human rights. Now I'm going to talk about some of the incentives for knowledge sharing that I'm familiar with. So starting out at New Tactics, we identified these as potential incentives for participation for our community. It really ties into the slide a couple slides ago about the benefits of participating in knowledge exchange. So you can learn a new approach, you can learn a new resource, a new guide or platform that you didn't know about before, learn something new by reflecting and sharing your experiences. You can meet new practitioners that you can call on for advice in the future. It's also an opportunity to give back to the community. Say you've been working in human rights for the past 30 years. This is your chance to contribute back to the community what you've been learning. And then finally, you can be seen as a leader in the field, which is often really important. Okay, so looking at these incentives, we actually took the first 4 that are listed here, and we decided to survey the community to ask if we were on track. And we actually learned something pretty interesting, which is that people that were participating in our online discussions, 198 of them, they, on average, felt like the activity of sharing was the most useful part, which is so interesting to me. So just having a format and a structure and a space to be thinking about the work that you did and sharing it in a useful way, that was what was most useful to people. So that's something maybe to keep in mind as you're talking to your community about participating in knowledge exchange, is that the act of sharing will be helpful as well, in addition to learning about the experiences of others, meeting new people, learning about new tools. Okay, so I also wanted to touch on a few tactics that could help you to leverage some of these incentives. So let's say your community is passionate about learning new things. What I would recommend is that we ask questions to get at that transferable nugget of knowledge and model the kind of knowledge that you want people to share. If the incentive that you want to focus on is about learning something through this reflection and the sharing, I think it's really helpful to provide a lot of support for that sharing process. So that would include templates and guides and advice on what effective knowledge sharing looks like. When they are sharing information, ask a lot of follow-up questions to really get at the heart of what is transferable in the story that they're sharing. And then encourage them to share the outputs of that knowledge exchange with their colleagues. You know, remind them that this is something that is going to live on beyond this event or, you know, this particular comment or case study, that this is something that we can use over and over. That can be really helpful. If the incentive that you want to focus on is about meeting new practitioners, video conference calls are a great way to build rapport and familiarity and trust within the community. And then if your community members want to be seen as a leader in the field, a great way to leverage that is to promote their contributions through social media, through your newsletter, through websites, so that people can see that this person is knowledgeable on this thing, and everybody feels good about that. Okay, so next I'm going to talk about some formats. I think this is kind of the juicy part. Lots of people have been asking questions about this too in the presentations. So I've categorized them into 4 sections. The first one is webinars, conference calls, and hangouts. So these are really great ways to engage people in knowledge exchange because it's so easy. It's so simple for people to sit back and watch a video. You can also record it and share it later. It's time limited, so people don't have to feel like they need to take a week out of their work. It's just like an hour and a half. So it's doable. What I think works really well for these kinds of formats is to recruit and coach 2 to 3 people to present their experience or knowledge on a topic and then open it up to questions. So this kind of goes back to modeling the behavior that you want to see. You'll have a number of people providing their perspective on the same topic. So it's easier for people to understand what the transferable thing is that you're trying to get at because these 2 presenters are giving that to you. They're not necessarily talking about all the context and all the human rights issues that they're dealing with in their country. They're talking about something really specific that everybody that's listening can benefit from. But when you're looking at these formats, good facilitation is really important, and you want to be sure to have somebody on hand who can help with technical difficulties, as we can see today. I have a list of platforms that are affordable and work well. Oh yeah, there's a link there on the slide. So hopefully that's useful too. But some of the tools that I like are Uber Conference, Google Hangouts is great, ReadyTalk. Yeah. Okay, another category is email discussion lists. And I'm sure that we are all on a few different lists. I have just some screenshots of a couple examples of groups that utilize email discussion lists. I've also written a blog post about how to choose the right platform for your email discussion list, and if you have any security concerns within your community, how to kind of balance the need for trust versus security and privacy. So check that out if you're interested in learning more about that. I think email discussion lists are really powerful. They're super simple. They come right to your email box. But what you need to focus on is moderation. I mean, you could get some rude messages because it's easier for people to be rude on email than if they have like their name and profile attached to them in a forum, or if it's a video conference call. So watch out for that. You're going to want to set up some strong guidelines for the community that's within this email discussion list. And what else did I want to say about this? Oh, one of the challenges with an email discussion list is sharing summaries of what's coming out of these discussions. So usually email discussion lists have an archive, and you can open that up to the members. You could open it up so that it's accessible to the public, but there might be a better, more effective way of sharing the knowledge that's coming out of these conversations. So you want to think through what that would look like. It might be a blog post or something else. Okay, another category of formats is the online discussion forum, and I have a number of examples of this. I know that in a lot of the previous presentations, people have been talking about Drupal and how maybe that's not the best choice anymore, but I actually really like Drupal, so I would love to keep talking about that during the questions period if you guys want to. We use Drupal 7 for new tactics, and it worked really great. We're huge fans of open source software. But then on the right here, the Global Partnership for Social Accountability Knowledge Platform is using a tool called BuddyPress, which is based on WordPress. And comparable to that, Drupal has Drupal Commons. So BuddyPress and Drupal Commons are those content management systems approach to building something like Facebook. And I have a couple more examples here. The Open Knowledge Foundation and a few other groups use Discourse, which is something you can just plug into your current website. Super easy to put together. But I don't think it's open source. And then you can also use Twitter. I'm part of a community called ComBuild, and we used to have regular discussions on Twitter using the ComBuild hashtag. So that's another way to go. But the power of these online discussion forums is that you're basically crowdsourcing knowledge, and it lives as content on your website, which is really helpful because you can do text searches, and those comments can come up in your search. You can connect it to other content on your website through links, through taxonomy. It's really powerful if you know what you're doing and if you're using a good content management system. What we did at New Tactics is we hosted monthly, week-long online discussions where we would recruit around 6 to 10 conversation leaders, and they would commit to posting at least twice per day to keep the conversation going. And this worked really well because we had people from all over the world participating. So you could do it in the morning in New York, and then the person in Thailand could do it in their morning, and everybody can just be responding to each other's comments. Let's see. Good moderation is important for this. You want to encourage people to reply to each other. Otherwise, a lot of times people tend to just post their comment as if it's just this separate thing, and they don't think about reading the other comments and replying directly to those. So you need to kind of coach people into that. Yeah. And then it's also really helpful to summarize these discussions once in a while. I mean, some of these forums are going to live forever, but if there's something that comes out of a thread that's particularly useful, you might want to summarize it and share it in a different way so it's more accessible. Okay, and then finally we have in-person exchange. We can talk more about this at the end if you guys have any questions about it. I don't know if this is something that's important to this group, but we've come up with a pretty fun way to ask participants at a workshop or a conference to write down a skill that they can share on one piece of paper, write down a skill that they want to learn on another piece of paper, and then you provide activities to connect those people together. And Aspiration Tech has a lot of other great ideas for how to do this in person, and I provided a link to their wiki. Okay, so facilitation techniques and providing support. So we're coming to the end here. So these are a few things that I wanted to mention that I think work really well, and on the other side, what doesn't work so well when it comes to facilitation. For me personally, I think that providing structure is really good. So most of these recommendations are around how to structure the discussions and the exchange. So the first one here is selecting specific topics which can lead to sharing practical, useful information. So if you can get really specific, like, what's an example? I would like to host a discussion through Heradox about effective file naming conventions for human rights images. And that's pretty specific. And you can get really detailed, like what are the tools, what are the examples of how people are doing this, what are the templates people are using, and you can get really practical with that kind of thing. What doesn't work so well is when you have these really broad, vague topics, because often it stays at that conceptual and theoretical level. I mean, if that's what you're going for, that's fine, but it just takes so many extra steps to get down to that really practical knowledge and skill sharing. What else seems to work well is to coach a few people to share their knowledge on the topic with a structured format. So we, like with New Tactics, we would really coach people on what kind of information we were looking for. So we'd have like a list of 5 questions, and their presentation would respond to those 5 questions. And what doesn't work so well is presenting a list of questions to a big group of people and just asking them to respond. I've been on a few of those calls recently, and at the end of the call, you just don't really know what's coming out of it, because people just want to talk about what they're working on and they want to be heard, and that's great and that's totally natural, but it's helpful to provide more structure so that the information that's being shared is going to be useful and fits into a format. Another thing that works well is to encourage participants to share examples, so that this really grounds the information in the real world as opposed to sharing hypotheticals and ideas, because if you're sharing ideas, it's hard to provide advice and experience when people ask follow-up questions. And then finally, I encourage people to share less of the background information on why they did what they did and more about the how we did it information. So I try to get them to avoid like an open-ended discussion or presentation. And like I talk a lot about structure, and what I mean by structure in these contexts is that it's like the bigger picture of the structure is that we had a really organized way of including people in contributing their knowledge to each other. So it was 5 days, it was each month, the expectations were really clear, each person was expected to post twice a day. We had a really clear timeline of the steps. So like 1 week before the discussion started, this is what you will be doing. 1 day before the discussion starts, we'll have a conference call and everybody will be able to ask questions. We provide instructions on how to participate. So we did a lot of that kind of back channel support. Okay, so hopefully that's helpful. And then moving on to a few other ways to provide good facilitation and support to the people that are doing the knowledge exchange. You want to model the behavior that you want, and there's a few different ways to do this. You can share examples of what you want. So you can share a link to a really great comment that has all the components that you're looking for. You could share a recorded presentation of the kind of presentation that you want them to create. And then I would encourage you to participate yourself, because as a facilitator, you really set the tone. You could also recruit champions to model what you want. So it's a similar idea, but you're really providing a lot of guidance to the practitioners that you're asking to participate. So in this example, like maybe I would ask somebody, hey, I know that you've developed this tool for video verification. Can you please reply to this comment? Here's the link, and share why you chose open source. So that they don't have to think about it too much. They know exactly what you want. And then guidelines and templates are really helpful. I can provide a link to what we used. We shared a list of tips for useful participation and knowledge sharing to the conversation leaders, and I can share that with you guys too if that's helpful. Encouragement is really good. You want to always be in touch with the participants and let them know that the information that they're sharing is useful. Also take that opportunity to provide any extra tips or advice. You also want to show your appreciation as much as possible, and that's with personal emails, but also promoting their contributions on social media and other places. Like public appreciation is always appreciated. I would recommend that you do what it takes to get people to ask follow-up questions, because participants always feel really great when their contributions are being read and responded to. That's probably one of the strongest ways that you can encourage participation. And then if it's possible for you, based on your platform, you could share information on how broad of a reach their contribution is having. So if you can see that 300 people have been looking at the discussion in the past 3 days, share those statistics with the group so that they know that people are looking. Because sometimes it's hard when you're just, like right now I'm presenting, but I don't hear or see any of you. So sometimes it can feel like you're just talking to no one. So if you have a way to tell them, like, no, people are listening, then do that. And then finally, this might be really obvious, but I think it's super important to make their contribution as easy as possible. So provide a lot of technical support. And what I'm talking about here is like really clear instructions on how to use the platform. Consider creating a video or guide with a lot of screenshots. I used to host a conference call a few days before each discussion would start, and I would walk people through how to participate, and then I would answer any questions that they had. And then give people your email address and be available for additional tech support and other support. And this is where you can reach me. My website, I have a few other posts on community building, my email address, and I'm KJ Anton on Twitter.